Flying solo tonight. No producer, no guest host, no editor, and no but the audience watching me. Who will help me when it all goes wrong? If it goes wrong, if it goes wrong. Or will it be IMP soon? Flying solo at 8 p.m. tonight on the order paper baptized.
And good evening and welcome to tonight's Order Paper podcast. As you might gather, flying solo. Laura is given apologies due to the fact that she's had on and off no power in Ekatuna. And Elle, who was meant to jump in to take place with Laura at 7:15 tonight, messaged me to say, sorry, family emergency comes in, which is Murphy's Law on a long weekend. So we might have to sit there and do it. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, we currently have a poll out there. Should all coalition MPs be thrown into Wellington Harbour tomorrow as a celebration of Labour Day? If you'd like to sit there and vote in that poll, you can do so, considering the reason why they will be thrown in the Wellington Harbour is if you insist on people working more than 80 hours a day, 40 hours a week, and more than 5 days per week. So that's the reason behind Samuel Parnell, who was the person who sat there and did it. Now, I'll just go and bring you up an image on there of Samuel Parnell, who was the person who basically sat down there and got basically, brought. Oh, that's the one there. So Samuel Parnell immigrated from the United Kingdom and basically relocated to Wellington, and he basically brought in the whole union thing of no more than 80 hours a day and 40 days a week. Yeah, so that's on there. Addressing the comment from Dave, a very tidy room. Yeah, I'm moving house tomorrow. So I think you might sit there and see things in there. New room will definitely, as you can see, I'm just at that point where this end of tenancy has been one of the worst ones I have dealt with. So it's not exactly been a nice, easy process. So just be aware on that one. So that's it's a bit of a sore point for me at the moment. You'll probably find out more after what's happened. It's still got quite a few more weeks to run its course. and it's not exactly smooth sailing. Oh, you should know me, Kiwi Skirt. Yeah, but somehow I managed to make sure my whole life actually runs. I mean, I ran the coffee cake yesterday. I'll still be going to work on Tuesday. I'll still be visiting Grandma on Tuesday. Still be going to work on Wednesday. Still be going to work on Thursday. Well, next Sunday, have the final inspection, ironically, to this room. It will look a hell of a lot better. And I'll still be broadcasting the Order Paper podcast at 8 p.m. that night. And I'll be doing the Sunday Star Times paper run. Oh, I love what you put on there, not Benedict. Yep, I can see what you mean. Thrown into Wellington Harbour. Yes, as a plain yes, I agree with you on that one. Can the wording go? No, I can't change the wording. So yes, but agree. Don't agree with them to be killed, just to sit there and learn how to be in the bitterly cold water of Wellington's harbour. Not sure who should sit down there and get there. I mean, hey, we do it off Tony Wharf. The Bish can be thrown into the Wellington Harbour without leaving his electorate. You know, not many coalition MPs will be able to say that. You know, I mean, if we want to throw in for good measure, Greg O'Connor, Tamara Hall, Julia Genta, they're local MPs. They could jump in the harbour. Nicola Willis, she lives in Wellington Central. She could jump in the harbour and have her kids waving from the sideline. Okay, so let's get on to the first part of the show. We will sit there and kick off with the interrupted debate of the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill with MP Dr. Tracy McCallum. And let's get this all going off right, and we'll put that on.
Moana Marine and Coastal Area Amendment Bill, third reading.
I call on Government Order of the Day number 5.
Interrupted debate on the second reading of the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill.
So we're up to call number 3, which is the Labor Party call, and just for attention for the whips, note by agreement that the Labor swapped their 10-minute call number 2 with the Green Party on this bill. So just noting that. Dr. Tracy McCallum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill, as you correctly so stated, was a bill that we discussed last week, interrupted, so it bears worth taking a couple of minutes to re-explain what the bill does. The bill establishes the legal framework for time of use or congestion charging, a tool that, if used correctly and if implemented correctly, can help us manage traffic flow and improve productivity on some of our busiest roads, which is really important. It allows local authorities, working with Waka Kotahi, to propose and to implement schemes. And these schemes will charge vehicles entering high traffic areas at certain times of the day. So it's relatively straightforward, but the key is in how it's implemented. The aim overall, Mr. Speaker, is to reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and fundamentally just make better use of our existing infrastructure. And if we look at the international context, congestion charging is obviously not new. It's already in place in places like London, Singapore, Stockholm, Milan, and very recently has come into play in New York. And all of those schemes and all of those schemes tend to work quite well, so there's no reason for us not to have a good crack at implementing it here. And in all of these cities, even a small reduction in the number of vehicles on the road has actually led to really big improvements in traffic flow, which is important, but also in things like air quality and in travel times. And I'm sure that there's many people that can relate to the need to do something about some of our most congested roads. Now, the Ministry of Transport's modelling here in this context suggests that there's no reason that we shouldn't assume that we can't have similar gains in New Zealand, potentially cutting peak hour traffic in Auckland, for instance, up to by as much as 12%, and bringing congestion down to what people could relate to as those school holiday levels. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Select Committee worked very diligently on this, on the Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee, and the committee received a wide-ranging range of submissions, as one would expect, from local councils, from the transport sector itself, from freight interests, from privacy experts, from everyday New Zealanders who were interested in this bill. And the committee worked, I think, quite constructively across the parties, so I'd like to acknowledge that and thank all of the people that took the time to make those submissions for their thoughtful engagement. So we will be supporting this bill because we support the bill's broad intent. And we did participate, obviously, quite forthcomingly in that select committee process and push quite hard for some of the amendments that were accepted to make sure that the framework ultimately is fair, that it actually does work, that it's locally driven, which we think is an important aspect of this bill, and that there's a requisite amount of accountability, because that's important for the public to be able to trust the system that they're very much going to be a part of. So if we look at the key issues and improvements from that select committee process, and in particular focus a little bit more on the part where it was really important to look at that strengthening of that local decision making. One of the strongest themes that came through in that submission process was a really genuine concern about local authority voice. And as introduced, the bill gave Waka Kotahi significant control, including having the chair of each scheme board and ultimately also the casting vote. So through the select committee process, as is the way it should work, there was an opportunity to rebalance that somewhat, and also note that a cap on board membership was removed, ensuring that each participating local authority, as you can imagine, can be configured in various different ways depending on the geographic location of the scheme under consideration. So really important to remove that cap to make sure that every local authority who has some skin in that game was able to be represented on that board. And now, I think, quite importantly, also the chair will now be independent. And I think that's really important because rather than being not independent, it's important that it be appointed jointly by the local authority and NZTA, so that there's that proper buy-in and the proper neutrality and independence of the chair. Certain key decisions must also be ratified by a majority of local authority members before being sent to the minister, so the minister is able to have that information in full. And these changes mean that local councils, I think, will have a real influence over the schemes that because they affect local residents, and it is hyperlocal and it is situational, so that seems only right and fair. With the second aspect, Mr. Speaker, there was a need to clarify the legal status and transparency. The committee agreed to clarify that scheme boards are not separate legal entities. They operate as collaborative governance bodies. We also ensured that the information is subject to the Local Government Official Information and Meeting Act, the LGOIMA, as a means by which to ensure that that provides that transparency and that accountability. With respect to privacy and data protection, a number of submitters mentioned this, including the Privacy Commissioner, and they raised concerns about the use of camera and vehicle tracking technology, and the committee responded by requiring that each scheme to include an impact assessment on privacy specifically, so that's something that doesn't get lost in the broad range of measures that scheme boards have to deal with, and the NZTA and enforcement authorities, it's incumbent upon them to develop those privacy policies in consultation with the Privacy Commissioner. So we think that those safeguards are important, and we think that should they be implemented properly, they're important to be able to maintain that public confidence. With regard to the use of the revenue, the bill now makes it clearer that revenue must first meet the costs of operating in the scheme, and any surplus must be reinvested in the local transport improvements. So importantly, the amended clause ensures that funds are used in ways that contribute to the effective and efficient and safe land transport system in the public interest, which I think makes sense. If you're collecting revenue from an area, it makes sense to be able to reinvest back in the areas that are relevant in that scheme, and do so in a way that doesn't counterbalance what is the purpose of the bill, which is to reduce congestion. So Labor continues to believe that the funds should support public and active transport, and helping people shift away from cars where possible. With regard to exemptions, there was obviously some debate on that, because the scheme is only going to be as good as it is robust, and by definition that means that there should be few exemptions. So initially only emergency vehicles were excluded, and the committee has now given the Minister flexibility to exempt public transport, buses and school transport services, which I do think is important, recognising the role that they ultimately play in also keeping cities moving and freeing up those networks. Mr. Speaker, the themes of the submission, if we had to sum it up, were that people were concerned about equity. Many submitters stressed that congestion charging shouldn't unfairly burden lower income drivers or particularly when people have few other choices. It's all very well to incentivise a change of behaviour, but those behavioural alternatives have got to be available to do so. Public transport was another theme. Councils and advocates alike emphasise that schemes must be accompanied and will only be as good as they could be with requisite attention to that reliable, affordable public transport outcomes as well and options. And consultation. There was a strong call for meaningful community consultation and engagement, which is the theme of any good process, really, isn't it? And it will only be as good as that is as well implemented. So going forward, Labour's view going forward is, as I said, we're happy to support the bill. It is the right tool. It must be implemented in the right way. Congestion charging absolutely has an opportunity here to make our cities more livable, more productive, and as long as it's fair and transparent and it gives people real alternatives, there's no reason why it won't work well. So we'll be supporting the bill, and we will continue our focus on making sure that when we're having these conversations that we're focusing on the quality of life for all New Zealanders, which includes their transport system.
Okay, so ChatGPT has sat there and helped summarise some of the facts that what Tracy has sat there and said in the bill. So let's bring that up on here. So basically it's giving councils local control over this, which will help support people like Wayne Brown, who has actually been advocating for this up in Auckland for quite some time, have transparencies obviously in their privacy. I mean, I think I'll be honest with you, our existing toll system is probably the best one that's in there, making sure that the funds raised go back locally, which currently is not the case. And for our free toll roads in the country, they go to pay off those projects. But the thing is, you're tolling existing roads, you're not tolling new roads. And obviously they had exemptions to school buses and emergency services vehicle, which is, to me, it's just like a no-brainer. Like, why would you be tolling the school bus going to there? I mean, actually, it should be on top of that, should also be public transport. I mean, we've got that right now where the fact that vehicles can go into the bus lanes that can use buses. If they're just a general lane, they're not a bus-only lane. It is buses, it is motorcyclists, it is taxis, emergency service vehicles, obviously school buses, that sort of thing there. And maybe, we should have like a different set of rules there, possibly like if it's part of congestion charging, if you're a motorbike, maybe you should not attract the same congestion charging rate as, say, if you're a car, that sort of thing there. So these are different things that can definitely be looked at. And thank you, Tracy, for sitting down there and doing that speech. Next up, we have Cameron Luxton, who will, from ACT. And we'll shift back to that one there.
Cameron Luxton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill in support, because New Zealanders already face a high cost from sitting in traffic. We face that cost in many ways: time delays getting home to family, getting to jobs, getting to work, getting deliveries on time. This bill is about freeing up traffic so we can have a more free-flowing system. Look, it's not a silver bullet. It's another to mix your metaphors on projectiles, an arrow in the quiver. It's not going to be the thing that solves all the issues in our transportation system, but it is an important hammer in the toolbox. It's very, now we're really getting into projectiles.
I'm waiting for one that actually relates to cars.
The committee work, the Transport Infrastructure Committee is, I think, the most collegial committee that this House has in its repertoire, and we really did work quite well as a committee on this. As the previous speaker, Tracy McCallum, pointed out, working towards bringing councils closer to the decision making, giving a strengthening to the provisions on the way revenue that is above operating costs will be used to improve traffic locally, because people, New Zealanders, want to see the costs of the system that they're paying to make sure that traffic can move more efficiently, going towards ways to improve traffic in the area. So that's something the committee really did work together quite well on addressing, having an investment agreement with the Minister to prioritise the spending in the area in ways that improve the experience of traffic congestion for those people using the scheme. Mr Speaker, I think it's a great idea. I commend it to the House.
Andy Fossil.
Speaker,
Okay, now Cameron Luxton has seemed to sit there and have probably one of the shortest speeches in history. And, well, what surprise here? Summary is that ChatGPT has sat there and brought up is the fact that it's a cooperative, cross-party approach. It strengthens local council decision-making, which is quite funny hearing that from ACT. They speak it, but they don't necessarily actually practice what they preach. And also for revenue that's above operating costs have to be put back into there. There was a comment mentioned here about it would be from Justin about it will be inappropriate for rural buses. rural school buses, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious, but you don't have a traffic congestion problem. It would not meet the test. I mean, imagine if they sat down there and tried to sit there and put, say, on State Highway 38, like what do you call it, time of use charge in Murupara. I mean, it would simply not sit there and kill them. Like what traffic congestion they have. Like, they've got no traffic lights in Murupara, is a good example. The same would sit there and be said in, Arthur's Pass if you've got the West Coast on the South Island. Like, I mean, the only place they've got traffic lights is one-lane bridges. So that would be there. But we get cases like Wellington, like Adelaide Road in Wellington, that would be a classic, perfect example that would make sense. Same with Dominion Road in Auckland, possibly Cameron Road in Tauranga could be one. If you've got, I'm trying to think, Victoria Street in Hamilton could be one that could be interesting. I mean, those bridges do get a bit congested at peak times. The whole city pretty much comes to a standstill. Now here's something from Simon. Interesting on that one. Yes, whereas the candidate who stood in Rotorua last local body elections actually lives in Tauranga, who's now councillor in Tauranga City Council, Martin Roomsbroom. Okay, let's kick off with Uncle Andy, and we will see how good old Uncle Andy, now where I get to the right one here, goes.
New Zealand First and also as Chair of the Select Committee to speak on the second reading, and I'm delighted to do so. As our resident builder has just said, this is one tool in the toolkit to help reduce congestion, and I've got to say that I thought that this process was Parliament at its best. This is responding to an issue which local government has asked central government for many, many years. I'm looking across the aisle there at the Honourable Phil Twyford, and he's acknowledging that when I was both the councillor and the Mayor of Wellington, I think, coming to see him and saying, actually, we want, as part of Let's Get Wellington Moving thinking, to have this tool in the toolbox, congestion pricing, to reduce the time which people spend in traffic, and also to be a revenue tool towards the Let's Get Wellington Moving. Mr. Speaker, this is also very much in alignment with the Infrastructure Commission, which encourages us to price things so that it spreads peak demand, and that doesn't matter whether it's transport or other forms of infrastructure. The Select Committee, Mr. Speaker, worked really, really well together. That we listened very carefully to the submitters. We asked good questions, and one of the things I really like is that members on both sides are asking questions, and you wouldn't know whether people were opposition or government most of the time. They're asking good questions because they want the answers. And the submitters brought thoughtful, constructive submissions to us. Mr. Speaker, the other thing that we did is we proposed a number of, I think, very constructive amendments, and the good thing was that some of those amendments, we got some pushback on those amendments from, shall we say, from across the road there, and we went and argued for those amendments. There were three particular ones that we argued for, and the Minister said, actually, after hearing that, I'm buying that. And I thought that was really, really good, because it showed to me what a Select Committee should be all about: hearing the evidence, hearing the submitters, giving advice and arguing for that advice, and ideally that advice being accepted. And I thought that was a really, really great thing. That's how Select Committees should work ideally, and maybe that's one of the things constitutionally we ought to be thinking about. I think also, Mr. Speaker, there was very much a desire on this, because it's intended to be a long-term thing, dealing with long-term transport infrastructure, a desire for multi-partisan agreement. And again, the more that we can do that in any area, ideally without watering it down, the better that will be for New Zealand Inc. So I want to say thank you to the Minister, I want to say thank you to the Select Committee, and I want to say thanks to the officials and to all the submitters for all your input. Mr. Speaker, we're already used to higher charges at times of higher demand in lots and lots of different areas, whether it's public transport, peak and off-peak fares, aviation, accommodation, energy. All of those things cost more at the times when they're in the highest demand. And time of use charging, Mr. Speaker, is about trying to manage and spread that peak when there is high traffic use. So it's not about charging all the time, it's about charging at the times when there is the highest traffic use. And as I said, that's something that local government has been asking for many years, asking for the empowering legislation to put that tool, that hammer, whatever it might be, that saw in the toolkit. The reason, Mr. Speaker, for time of use charging is to reduce congestion at peak times. Two ways. One is to encourage people to change the time which they travel, and the other one is to ask them to change the mode which they travel, so it's a way which induces less congestion. And doing this can enhance the efficiency of the transport network and raise economic productivity. And I can recall in introducing the second reading, the Honourable Chris Bishop's comments on the New York scheme, which he'd just been to see, which has just started, and saying this is working really, really well. And people actually going, we didn't like the idea, but now we like it. We see what it's doing. And I often hear people say, I've got to use my vehicle, I've got to use it at peak time, so why should I have to pay for it? But the reality is that at the moment, you spend a lot of that time at peak time travelling and you're stuck in traffic, so you're paying a cost. That cost is in your time, in your fuel, etc. So the idea of time of use charging is to encourage a few people, and it doesn't have to be a lot. It might only be 10%. If 10% of the people change the way they travel, it means that instead of being stuck in traffic, you've got relatively free-flowing traffic. So that's what this time of use charging is all about. Also, Mr. Speaker, it potentially allows us to delay or to avoid expensive capital investment where that might otherwise be proposed just for the sake of relieving peak congestion. So if you've got congestion all the time, sure, you need to invest in something. You need to invest in new infrastructure. But if it's only at peak, if you can spread that peak, if you can avoid that capital cost, that is a good thing for New Zealanding. It's also a potential funding tool. The late Let's Get Wellington Moving, as I indicated earlier, was predicated on a funding deal which included a local share, of which part would have come from a time of use charge or a parking levy. And I've already referred to discussions that I had with the Honourable Phil Twyford at the time. I think at the time you said, Mr. Twyford, that there was you didn't want another tax before the 2020 election, but it might be worth revisiting after the 2020 election. And that's, I think, where we got to. I also submitted, Mr. Speaker, well, I'm guilty there as well. I also submitted, Mr. Speaker, as Mayor of Wellington, along with Greater Wellington Regional Council on behalf of the Wellington region, to the 2021 inquiry on congestion charging, which Greg O'Connor chaired on behalf of the Auckland area, but obviously Wellington was very, very interested in this. So what did we hear, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the changes that we recommended in the bill? I want to pick on a few of those. First of all, the bill establishes a very structured process. It sets up scheme boards, which involve both councils and NZTA to design proposals, to consult with the public, that's really, really important, on those proposals, to consider privacy issues, that is also really, really important, and to recommend those proposed schemes to the Minister. Now, originally, the governance structure which was proposed was that NZTA and councils would have basically the same weight, but NZTA would have the chair, so NZTA would be dominant. And the councils when they came to us and submitted, they were very, very clear, you do that, we're out. They were pretty blunt on that. They said, we are not going to be beholden to NZTA, beholden to the government. We are partners in this. We need to be equal partners in this. And because they basically said, this is not just about state highways, it's also about local roads. And so we proposed, and I think that's had broad acceptance, it's one of the ones we pushed with the Minister, we proposed an independent chair appointed jointly and unanimously by NZTA and by the councils, and that's set out in section 65 V1D. And we also made some changes to ensure that every council that has joined the process is involved, is represented on the scheme board, and also that some key points in the decision process that councils have to agree to or they don't proceed, the scheme doesn't proceed, and those are set out in new section 65 ZAC. So we've really listened very hard to councils. This is about treating councils with respect and working together in partnership. We've also said we want to protect the NZTA in case a whole lot of costs get loaded onto NZTA, and that's the addition of section 65 WCB, which means that NZTA has to agree where there's a whole lot of potential costs imposed on it. NZTA's got to be able to agree with that or to say, no, we're not happy with that particular situation. So that's the first area of change. The second one that we argued for was exemptions to the time of use charge. Now, we started off with the only exemption that was going to be was for emergency vehicles. There was some argument that no, that emergency vehicles shouldn't be covered either, and they should have to be subject to the charge, but the vast majority of people said, no, we don't agree with that. But the one, and we had arguments on the other side saying that things like freight should be exempted from that, but our view was that freight can choose to travel to some degree when it wants to travel, and it also benefits from having less traffic on the road. But the one we did argue about was public transport, because the whole rationale for time of use charging is to change the time or the mode, and public transport is about the mode. So we argued for that, and that is in there. Also, rural school buses are in there as well. Not that there's a huge number of them, but they're also in there. And the third recommendation is where any surplus funding, if there is surplus funding, and that's not the primary driver is about changing behaviour, but if there is surplus funding, where it can be used, the original proposition was anywhere in the region, but what we said is no, actually what we want is a much closer nexus between where the revenue is raised, the congestion area, and the area where it's spent. So that is included there in section 65X3. So, Mr. Speaker, just to finish off, I think it's been a very, very good process. I think we've got to a very good outcome, and I just want to thank everybody who's been involved in this, and it puts in place something in the toolkit that local government has been asking for a long time, which hopefully should save the country a significant amount of money in congestion and potentially in capital programs. I commend the bill to the House.
Okay, it's really interesting hearing that from Uncle Andy there, and also being the former Mayor of Wellington, and he does live in Karori, and Karori does have the bottleneck and Karori has a very unique peak hour traffic situation in Karori, where the fact that the town itself congests for about, it's 2 hours, but it actually goes on a bit longer either side of it. Basically, it's like, for me, like when it does do deliveries, it's like don't go there before 9 o'clock in the morning, or make sure you're out of there before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because before 9 o'clock in the morning you've got a bus every minute heading into the city through the Karori tunnel, and it's the one suburb in Wellington where we can't run double-decker buses, and that's obviously where Andy's done there. He's definitely mentioned a lot of his points about being as the Mayor of Wellington, And yeah, he's got some good things. Time-back use. The other thing I'm glad Andy actually has mentioned is physically is possibly about car park tax, or a charge for car parks as opposed to congestion as well, considering there are many companies in Wellington who are literally creaming it off there for parking that add to the congestion problem, but the rates they themselves pay could be the same as a retail building, for example. So it could possibly have a levy that, car park tax that could go on there. So going from a summary of what his speech from according to ChatGPT, it says it's about giving more control to local things, obviously. Council objected, insisting on equal partnership, which makes complete sense. And the bill to put an independent chair, which, I mean, unless you signed yourself up to the stupid Taxpayers Union pledge, you would be supportive of that. And obviously cost protections in there. NZTA does have a very good system in there, and the fact that they've added more exemptions into the system. But it's interesting there was a rejection for freight, which is interesting in that one. But I mean, I can also tell you for the fuel industry, they tend to make sure their shifts start and finish outside of peak times. So they don't have people, say, driving their 44-ton tankers through the middle of Wellington City to deliver fuel. Actually, you find out in Wellington, most fuel deliveries actually tend to happen at night, not during the day. And I can sit there and definitely speak for that from BP, and also for surplus revenue to be reinvested into local infrastructure. I mean, that should be bus stops, bus lanes, reduced public transport fares, that sort of thing, or possibly even upgraded train services. If we're in Wellington, I do believe one person mentioned in here about Catherine mentioned about how they've taken all the trains out to Dunedin. Great point. Could sit there and bring back the trains to Dunedin. Yeah, obviously got to sit there and keep it out there. I mean, with Wellington Hospital down the road, definitely sit there and do that. So let's kick off next with Celia Wade Brown with more from the Greens.
Wade Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill, though I do have some significant reservations, mostly about missed opportunities to make this legislation truly transformative. I mean, let's make no mistake, we're in the middle of a transport cost of living crisis. New Zealanders are trapped in car dependency with inadequate alternatives in public transport, walking, cycling, or even car sharing. This government has made that cost of living crisis worse by halving the walking and cycling budget and increasing the public transport fare box recovery, which directly translates into higher bus and train fares. And regional councils wear the blame for that, while central government escapes scrutiny. But in this dark transport landscape, time of use charging offers a wee glimmer of hope. So the fundamental, you like the dark transport landscape, that's great. The fundamental problem with the transport policy is its obsession with building more roads and tunnels. These projects simply move the choke point rather than solve congestion, although there are some necessary roading improvements to avoid slips and dangerous areas. We are not against all road improvements by any means. We just think the bulk of the billions ahead over the next 60 years are not the best investment. I did support congestion charging at council, both as a councillor and as mayor, as did my colleague over here, and it's actually quite nice to say we're going to get it. We're going to be part of the solution together. So thank you. I caught the end of your speech, Mr Foster, and I agree on many points. And I'm sure you, as Chair of Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee, made some great leadership improvements there. I'm also glad that local government has a very strong role in the control and use of the funding generated, which is highly appropriate and necessary. I am particularly amazed and delighted by 65Z2C, because it mentions economic, social, cultural and environmental impacts. Long live the well-being, as I say. However, this bill could be much better. Expert submitters on a similar topic in the 53rd Parliament made some compelling cases for low emission zones, which have proven successful overseas, not least in London. Because congestion is only one negative impact of our car dependency. The health costs from air pollution actually exceed the cost of congestion itself. And yet this bill ignores that evidence entirely, presumably because it's an inconvenient truth that air pollution from motor vehicles, and this is the 53rd Parliament, so no doubt the costs have increased like everything else. approximately $10 billion in social costs every year, including 13,000 cases of childhood asthma prevalence. Now, we could actually invest in stopping health problems, and that might save, in long term, some of our shared health costs downstream. There are some problematic imbalances in the governance. As I understand it, Waka Kotahi holds disproportionate weight in decision-making. And while I really appreciate that the Wairarapa has separate councils from the Metro Wellington, the idea of having 3 Wairarapa mayors and 1 capital mayor on a board fills me with a little dismay. I do think the bill should explicitly require that the revenue funds public transport and active transport infrastructure, but this is legislation we won't oppose. We support its intent and recognise it as slightly watered down progress, but progress nonetheless. Thank you.
Dan Bidwell.
Okay, so as you can probably gather from Celia, now here's something interesting to point out there. When Celia Wade-Brown was Mayor of Wellington, Andy Foster was actually the chair of the Transport and Infrastructure Committee that dealt with things like roading projects and all that sort of thing there. And so that's something also just worth noting. So here's the summary from ChatGPT. So this is what. So these are the shortcomings that Celia highlighted from the bill, which is the government remained fixated on building more roads, which shifts rather than solves congestion. The bill ignores air pollution and health impacts, despite vehicles' emission causing an estimated $10 billion in annual social costs and 13,000 cases of childhood asthma. Do love the fact that Jerry's been hungry, but the current chair in the seat is Tiano Tuiono, just to put some reference out there. Yeah, there's also government imbalance, which, and also mention the fact that if there was a equal share on the board, Wairarapa, which has 3 separate district councils, could have 3 positions on the board, whereas the Wellington City Council, which has about half of Greater Wellington's population, would only have 1 seat. So good on Celia for mentioning that, as she herself has, been in that one. Interestingly, she says it's watered down, but I mean, each to their own opinion. I mean, it's it's just one of those things of what it is. Sometimes people sit down there and put it in there. Now let's do a quick summary. So let's get on to the next one, which is Dan Bidwell. And I better get the tabs back on right, and there we are.
This bill is a game changer for tackling congestion in our major cities: Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, possibly Hamilton, the city of the future, the Tron. And we've seen that, Mr. Speaker, in other jurisdictions, and in particular New York, which my colleague Andy Foster mentioned, which implemented the scheme and has had a great success since its introduction in January this year. A 60-minute journey in Manhattan has now been slashed to about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Traffic reduction has fallen by 10%. The noise complaints in the city of Manhattan has fallen by 70%. Mr. Speaker, the city raises 50,000 or 50 million, I should say, each month from the scheme that it can then plough back into public transport. And buses travel faster in Manhattan as a result. So it's been a real win all around for the city of Manhattan. And now we're going to be able to trial it here in New Zealand. And that's a great thing, Mr. Speaker. It's been a pleasure to be part of the Select Committee process. In summary, we've made 4 broad changes that I think address the key issues that came from the Select Committee submissions. The independent chair, I thought, was raised by a lot of submitters and will go some way to making sure that the scheme board makes decisions in an impartial manner for the benefit of people in the city. There is strengthened privacy protections so that the scheme board must adhere to those protections to protect the privacy of people. It clarifies that that the revenue gained must be ploughed back in for the benefit of public transport in the scheme, in and around and within, as we've discussed on Select Committee, in the area. And it clarifies the exemptions that are basically allowed. And this scheme, to be successful, fewer exemptions were considered, and really we've only allowed emergency vehicles and public buses for, in particular, school as well. So, look, that is it, Mr. Speaker. It's been a great bill, and I commend this bill to the House.
The Honourable Phil Twice.
Well, that's a very short speech, but typical from a government party. They tend to, it's not quite seat warmer territory, so good on you, Dan, for not doing a seat warmer speech. So let's see what ChatGPT sat there and summarised from his speech there. Okay, so let's sit there and repeat himself about the fact that it's an independent chair, strengthening privacy for motorists, requiring that. God, I know I'm a bit young, but it sounds like it was a bit of a broken record from the speeches that have come out from multiple different MPs so far. So, yeah. Now, just before we address ones, Alex, I'll get to your super chat about the Petone Granada Link Road. I do have now. Now, we do have a little bit of... So here's some good news, is that we definitely have some changes that have come up through here. So, can this... Oh, we can sit there and see that in a bigger PDF. Okay, and I'll actually zoom that in because that's actually quite... so that you guys from home can sit there and see this. So, for those who are watching on here. So, Petone Granada Link Road. So, this is the revised plan, which is a lot better than the one that went straight up the gully through here that was going to cost about $1 billion in earthworks. This one's definitely making better uses of the contours of the road. And obviously, going to be interesting with an upgrade in Central Granada Drive, considering it's literally off a motorway exit. And obviously putting 2 tunnels through there and going through on there. And also, but it does definitely solve the potential problem we have in Petone, which is the on-off ramp, and obviously connects into its own road for Cross Valley Link, which is interesting that Cross Valley Link is looking at Seaview and they're not in that particular one, not Wainuiamata. But yes, so we've addressed what Mr. Alex has sat there and brought up about Cross Valley Link. And now let's get on to Phil Twyford with his speech on the Land Transport Time Use Charge Amendment Bill.
Mr. Speaker, I was in the House for the previous debate on the Takatai Moana Bill, and it's hard to imagine a debate that could have had a more deeply felt and visceral opposition from this side of the chamber, at least, and a kind of an implacable difference, really, between the government and the opposition benches. By contrast, and I think we have to kind of celebrate the moments where there is a kind of constructive consensus across the House, because it doesn't always happen, and when it does, I think it's a good thing. And I'm pleased to see that time of use charging is in this kind of cherished category where there is quite a lot of shared agreement between the political parties and an ability to progress an important reform like this in a constructive way. Good things often take time, and I'm very pleased to see that policy work that I started as Transport Minister probably 7 or 8 years ago has finally found its way through a succession of other ministers to this House in the form of this bill. It's true what Andy Foster said before, that he beat a path to my door asking that Wellington should be able to implement congestion charging. And it's not that I said no because it was a bad idea, it's because I said no, it was premature. And there needed to be a significant amount of thinking and policy work done before I think we were ready to implement a reform like this. I've always been of the view that this, alongside zoning reform that allows our towns and cities to grow up, to embrace density, to build the fabric of a modern city, that and time of use charging on our transport network are 2 of the most critical reforms that will allow our cities to grow. We have some major problems to unlock, particularly in our largest cities, that have the legacy of really poor 20th century policies that essentially locked in a 1950s very dispersed urban form, cities that are utterly dependent on motorway systems that cannot efficiently move people and goods around. And this reform and zoning reform to allow more intensification, particularly around transit corridors, is going to help us move our cities into a much more efficient and livable 21st century form. The dirty secret of modern cities is that cities of scale that are growing
cannot build their way out of congestion. It is simply not possible. Because when you have a growth in population, a growth in demand to move goods and people around, every time you expand the roads in that context, you simply induce more demand. And Auckland is a textbook case study of induced demand. It is not possible to keep adding more and more road space and think that that's going to reduce congestion, because it never does. And so we have a problem, because congestion, if we continue to refer to Auckland as our kind of case study here, congestion is dragging down our productivity in the city. It means that for people and goods to get where they need to go in our economy, it takes much longer. Time is money. It literally costs more money to get goods and to get people, to get tradespeople to the jobs they need to do. It also severely undermines the efficiency of our labour market. Cities are basically labour markets, and if you stop people getting to the jobs that they might want to do, you dramatically reduce the efficiency of the labour market, because firms cannot get access to the choice of workers and the number of workers that they need to do their jobs. Firms cannot get access to the customers that they need to do the work that they do. And for individuals, when you've got a city that's transport arteries are as clogged up as Auckland are, individuals cannot get access to the full range of opportunities that the employment market offers. So labour productivity gets dragged further and further down. Those are some of the reasons why this reform is so important for the future of our cities. So time and use charging, and this framework will allow congestion charging to be brought in by local authorities, working in partnership with Waka Kotahi, NZTA. They will be allowed to put in place schemes that will charge by time and use charging to add a charge to people using, either entering a particular zone with a cordon around it, or a particular stretch of let's say, a motorway network. And by adding a small charge to the use of that particular roading network at particular times of the day, it will incentivise people to change their transport behaviour, to take another mode, to get on the train or the bus or the ferry, or to time their journey for a less expensive hour when they don't have to pay that extra fee. And there's now a really great body of evidence and research internationally from places like London, Singapore, Stockholm, New York, Milan, who have implemented these schemes. And we can say with certainty that it has the potential to reduce 10% or more of drivers at a particular time of day when the charging is in place. And for those of us who are used to the school mid-afternoon rush hour, and you know, in my case in Auckland, when it's school holidays, that 10 to 15% of traffic that's not on the road before and after school makes all the difference. So it's not like we're saying a reform like this, it raises the prospect of everybody being forced off the road and having to take public transport or bike to and from work. No, if you can shift 10, 12% of people in terms of when they choose to travel and how they choose to travel, you're getting, it's a vast increase in the efficiency of the use of the network, and that's what we want to see. So for a city like Auckland, I return to my theme, and that is it's simply not possible to keep adding on road space and building more motorways. And in Auckland, if you look at the motorway network, it just isn't possible. If you look at Spaghetti Junction, for example, you've got this radial network with motorways coming in to a place like Spaghetti Junction. You physically cannot engineer more road space there. And so that's why reforms like this are really necessary. I think there's a really interesting sidebar to the story about time of use charging as a way of alleviating congestion, and that is that because of the electrification of the vehicle fleet, petrol excise, which for a long time through hypothecation has basically funded our transport system, that is, because of the electrification of the fleet, that is no longer going to be the case, and we face declining revenues from petrol excise. We have to find other ways to fund our transport system. And the technology that's in use here, and what will very likely be a shift to electronic, GPS-based road user charges for all vehicles, a technology that's already in place for a significant section of our trucking fleet, will mean that petrol excise can be phased out and replaced with a much more comprehensive way of raising revenue based on people's real-time use of the transport network. So it offers a way out of that problem. It's actually very efficient and very fair, but there's a third reason that actually it's quite an exciting reform for New Zealand, and that is that our cities have largely been based on the idea of universal car ownership. and dispersed suburbs where we built motorways out, an hour's drive out to the countryside from the centre of the city or from where the jobs are, with the idea that people can drive to work. That is, in effect, a huge hidden subsidy, those roads, to the transport costs that enable these dispersed pattern of urban development. Time and use charging on the network, which will ultimately replace the petrol excise, will allow those costs to be fully calculated and brought into the system.
Dr. Carlstrom.
Okay, so summary from what ChatGPT has brought up, from what Phil Twyford has sat there and said here. Let's bring it up. It will replace the declining petrol tax revenue, which makes complete sense because the petrol itself, cars get more fuel efficient. I mean, if we sit there and take a look at aviation. I mean, avgas, like the Boeing 777 is way more fuel efficient than the Boeing 747. It's just basically, it's like, and big bulky planes, they aren't quite the thing as what they are. So I mean, the same is happening with cars. I mean, the fact that cars become more fuel efficient. I mean, hybrid typically uses about a third less petrol than the equivalent petrol motors of vehicles, that sort of stuff. Now, it will create a more equitable and efficient transport system tied directly to actual road use. Well, which is, that's a good point. It's because, at the moment, it's not necessarily do it. Like, I mean, here's a great one. If you hire a petrol generator, you pay road tax on the petrol that goes into a petrol generator. So that's something worth noting. And that petrol going to the generator ain't going on the road. There is ways to claim it back, but I mean, to be honest, it's not exactly as simple as you've got to keep really good books. In my case, I've never bothered because it'll be like $10 a year. And also there's hidden costs with urban sprawl. That is just one of those things that has happened on there. Now I'll show you some little different signs of traffic congestion in Wellington. So there's Terrace Tunnel at peak hour traffic in the morning. As you can sit there and see, the variable speed of the motorways is down at 60 k's. This is another one of State Highway 2. So this is between Petone, was it Narrowing Petone? Now that is caused by an accident, but that is literally how the congestion part is. Now here's something else that is quite remarkable, is Wellington's own Mount Victoria Tunnel, where the traffic lanes aren't even the minimum legal requirement of 2.75 metres wide. They're only about 2.5. And I mean, I know what it's like to drive a 2.2 metre wide truck through that tunnel. So it is definitely something on that one. So yeah, it's definitely showing some changes that are going on in there. Now we're going to, as what usually typically happens with government MPs, because we haven't had Laura here, we usually haven't got quite down this far down on here. I'm not going to bother with the rest of the speeches from the bills because they effectively are seat warmer speeches. You get my drift. Okay, so let's we're going to shift to the other one that we're literally covering is the Parliament bill. Now this is a really interesting sort of bill because it's about tidying up old pieces of legislation and moulding it into one complete bill over it. Now, so there's a lot of hand signs in here. And yeah, sorry, I don't have Laura who can sit there and go and look at this. Now, this is a bit of a Della bill, but it is a very useful bill for us to sit there and know going through on here. So let's sit there and kick off with the Parliament bill, and we'll kick off with the Bish.
Members, the House is in committee on the Parliament Bill and the Land Transport Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill. We will start with the Parliament Bill. We come first to Part 1. Part 1 is the debate on clauses 3 to 8, preliminary provisions and Schedule 1. The question is that Part 1 stand apart. The question is that the Minister's amendment to Part 1's... I'm going to make an exception this time because there were a few people wandering around and I did not see the member who ably chaired the committee. So I'll take a call. Right Honourable Adrian Rurifei.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm out of practice. I just wanted to make a brief call on part one of the bill. Basically to say it's important that and correct and right that these 4 pieces of legislation be brought together into one new piece of legislation. And the only other point that I would make is that, and it'll become relevant later on in the debate, is that it does not include the Official Information Act. And why I say that is because several submitters made submissions on that part, on the Official Information Act, to bring Parliament's information under that as well. And so those were deemed by the committee to be out of scope of this bill. That's my brief introduction, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity.
Kia ora,
Madam Chair. As we begin the start of the committee stage of this bill, I do look at the part 1 and the purpose, clause 3, and I guess what I want from the Minister is the purpose, as it says on currently, is the purpose of the Act is to consolidate and modernise the law about operating and administrating Parliament. And the reason I'd be interested in the Minister making a contribution is just for the public to understand what this is about, because I very much think this bill is about this place and about the people in this place and how it's funded and the goings on. And so for us, we don't want to labour the committee stage, but we do want to be seen to actually prosecute and ask some questions to give confidence to the public that they understand what this bill is about. And it's not just for us as MPs finding a way, I guess, to feather our nests or to make it easy for us, but it's to help make the system better.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an important bill, and I thank members of the opposition and others for their constructive engagement on this. We had a special select committee on this, which I think is duly appropriate. It was well chaired by former Speaker, Right Honourable Adrian Rurifei, and thank you for his contribution. This is an important piece of legislation, probably one that's a little bit overdue, and one that past governments and past houses, past parliaments have looked at. It brings together the Clerk of the House of Representatives Act 1988, the Parliamentary Service Act 2000, the Members of Parliament Remuneration and Services Act 2013, and the Parliamentary Privilege Act 2014. There's a couple of things going on there. One is that if you want to understand how Parliament operates and how it's funded and what its powers are and all of the legislation to do with Parliament, there isn't one place to find it. You've got to go look at those 4 acts. And this, if it becomes law and the House approves it, it will become the Parliament Act 2025 and it will be the one place. Now, people might say, well, bringing together legislation, that doesn't really seem like much of a deal, but actually it's important to the rule of law and cogency of the statute books that we don't have random pieces of legislation that do different things but all actually relate to the same topic, or in this case relate to the same institution. It's a very important home of our democracy. The second thing is that some of these statutes are quite out of date. So the last time we went through a serious round of kind of parliamentary reform was actually in Sir Geoffrey Palmer's day, that great reforming period from 1987 through 1990 that a bit controversial in some respects for some, but from a parliamentary point of view, quite a lot was done by Sir Geoffrey back then as Attorney General and Minister of Justice and Leader of the House to create essentially the modern day foundations of the Parliament's Select Committee system, for example. But the Clerk of the House of Representatives Act got its own act back in 1988 during that period. The Parliamentary Service Act 2000 is now 25 years old as well, and so it is about modernising this legislation. Parliament, in relation to the Parliamentary Privilege Act, Parliament went through an exercise soon after I became an MP, or it might have been contemporaneously when I became an MP, about responding to the judgment of Attorney General and Lee from memory, and there was another case as well in which it became, without boring the House, it became really clear that Parliament had to reassert the traditional privileges that exist for all members in this House around freedom of speech and put into statute some common law rights that had perhaps, at least arguably, contestably at law, didn't exist, or we need to make clear that they did exist. So the Parliamentary Privilege Act was a response to court judgments, and now it's going to be a part of the Parliament Act. There are some important changes that this bill makes in relation to parliamentary security, which no doubt we'll get to. It also importantly changes the funding model, and in particular it gives Parliament more independence from the executive in relation to the funding of Parliament. And in our Westminster system, with our fused executive and legislature, By definition, the government governs and controls the budget, but actually Parliament is its own separate institution, and there's always been a natural tension there, which actually, to be honest, you can't get rid of entirely, but there's always been a tension between the operation of the funding of Parliament, the legislature, its own institution, and the executive, which by definition is only the executive because it has control of the Parliament. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't be the executive. And so what this bill does is put in place a more independent process in which the House is in charge of its own budgets. There is some involvement with the executive, but it's a step forward from the status quo where I think most people would say it's more biased towards the government. That hasn't really been a problem, to be honest. I hope both sides of the House would agree on that. Hasn't really been a problem in practice. But there's always the potential, and law is sometimes not about necessarily solving the problems of today. It's about future-proofing to make sure we don't enjoy problems, or we don't endure problems in the future. So that's the purpose of the Parliament Bill.
Okay, so for those who are wondering, it is to sit there and summarise, multiple acts that govern Parliament. Now, the interesting fact is, because we're a constitutional monarchy with no written constitution, a lot of our laws are based on convention, which then have later been updated into acts that have been put in there. And the acts that, as you can sit there and see what Chris Bishop did mention on there, was the Clerk of House of Representatives 1988, the Parliamentary Services Act 2000, the Members of Parliament Remuneration and Services Act 2013, the Parliament Privileges Act 2014, and also it's and obviously it's going to combine it into one bill called the Parliamentary Act 2025. I'm pretty sure it will sit there and pass, but it also basically updates things there. One of the things that updates is family members. The legislation is quite outdated. It talks about all MPs having a wife. Well, many of them are women now, and also, I remember the first reading of the speech there, where they brought up with how the fact that Hannah Rafferty Clark, the person she brought to Parliament of spouse figure was her father, because she was 18 or 19 years old at the time of being elected. So, yeah, it's definitely quite an interesting thing in there. And it's the biggest reform since Sir Geoffrey Palmer was in Parliament. So it's definitely on there. Let's click on to part 2 of the Parliament Bill. Well,
in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that part 1 is amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we come now to part 2, which is the debate on clauses 9 to 39, parliamentary privilege. The question is that part 2 stand part. Right Honourable Adrian Rurawhai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Minister has pointed out, parliamentary privilege 2014, some submitters thought that it should stand alone. The committee decided that it could be included in there, and that it stood on its own mana, basically, in my words. And so I just wanted to make that comment for the Committee of the Whole. I think that it is important that all 4 of those pieces of legislation are brought together into one document, including parliamentary privilege. Thank you.
The question... I had started voting. So I think members are going to have to be quick on there's lots of parts to this bill, and I'm sorry, I had started voting. So the question is that the Minister's amendment to Part 2 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Right Honourable Chris Hipkins' amendment to Part 2 set out on AP number 344 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 2 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
And for those who are probably wondering what the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins' amendment is to make sure that no MP could be jailed or imprisoned by Parliament, which is probably a bit of a middle finger to Punjit Palmer. Could be, considering, she sought advice over having Te Pāti Māori MPs imprisoned earlier in the year, which I think is a very, very confusing part on there. Yes, Kiwi Skirt, yes, Adrian is a bit of a slow speaker. Yep, that's correct. Yep. So let's get on to part 3 and let's see what part 3 actually brings, because this is actually where there's some actual good news and some substantive talking.
Members, we come now to part 3.
Madam Chair.
I was just going to outline that this is the debate on clauses. I know the Minister knows, but this is the debate on clauses 40 to 56, the Speaker, Deputy Speaker and Parliamentary Precincts and Schedule 2. The question is that part 3 stand part.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
If the House will indulge me, or the Chair will indulge me, I do just want to make a brief comment in relation to part 2, which we've just covered, which I know we've been voted on, but there seems to be a spirit of bonhomie in the House, so I hope the House won't mind. The House has just voted on an amendment from the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins. I did just want to briefly touch on. I mistakenly looked at the amendment and thought it was in relation to part 7, so I thought we might have a bit of time, but it's actually in relation to part 2. The House has just voted that to clarify that the House of Representatives cannot imprison for contempt, and that is an important change. It could be seen as important. So it is not clear from a reading of McGee and the case law and Privileges Committee, recent Privileges Committee reports. It's not clear that Parliament could not, or the House could not, imprison someone for contempt of Parliament. And it's worth noting that this power has never been exercised in New Zealand by the House of Representatives, and so the House has just voted to make it clear that imprisonment is not an offence for contempt. Now, what is a contempt? Well, a contempt is a serious breach of standing orders as judged by the Privileges Committee. It's laid out in standing orders, and regrettably, that this Parliament, and indeed the Parliament before, has had some incidents where members have behaved badly. I think it's fair to say that, and people have been referred to the Privileges Committee, and people have been found guilty of contempt. And so there's a variety of punishments that can be laid down for that. What we've been discussing, or what has been discussed, is whether or not the extremity of the punishment could extend to imprisonment, and we've now decided that that is not the case. I'm advised that Section 8 of the Parliamentary Privilege Act 2014, which will now become part of the Parliament Bill, the House has the powers which are exercisable by the UK House of Commons as at the 1st of January 1865. And of course, back then, someone will have no doubt gone away and researched this, back then, in 1865, in the UK House of Commons, they did have the power to imprison people by committing them into the custody of the Sergeant at Arms. So it is at least arguable that the New Zealand House had that power up until, well, 2 minutes ago, or 2.5 minutes ago. I suppose it doesn't take effect yet until we receive the royal assent, so I don't know, next week or something. So it's now been clarified, and I do want to thank the Right Honourable Chris Hipkins for moving that amendment, which the government has been pleased to support.
Thank you. That's a very important clarification. So is this in response?
No,
or is this part
sorry,
3?
I'm on part 3.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
That was very important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For the record, I thought it was part 7 as well. So. Madam Chair, I just wanted to recognise that in part 3, the Speaker of the House will have the ability to delegate certain functions to the Deputy Speaker, which I think is wholly appropriate. In the same way that a Minister who also has responsibilities under the Public Finance Act, say, might delegate something to an Associate Minister or an Under-Secretary. And so I just wanted to just briefly recognise that in part 3, that is one of the things that has changed in there. Kia ora.
Ingrid Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to draw to the House's attention what I think is a really good change, but ask for a couple of clarifications, and that is in section 61, where we've got the meaning of an adult dependent, and we're talking about an adult dependent in relation to a person means a person who's a disability that they may require ongoing daily care, and this is going to entitle them to... Oh, sorry, my apologies, Madam Chair, I jumped ahead.
Glenn Bennett.
Clause 52 is around the House of Representatives may add to the parliamentary precinct. I just want to, obviously we have the current precinct where it's at, and well, the 3 buildings and buildings are currently being built. Just want to seek clarification that this obviously is around, the initial purchase of the land back in 1867, whatever it was, can be dubious in many ways, and just want to seek clarification from the Minister that when we talk about adding land to the parliamentary precinct, that this obviously will be in a way that is, fits in with current laws and isn't about acquiring land, but is around doing right by modern laws, and also the ability for members or the business committee to look at what the parliamentary precinct is. Does that fit into the space in terms of is Parliament able to not just purchase more land, but actually add to the precinct, for example, Defence House behind us, that becoming part of the precinct. So just want to sort of clarify that's obviously all sits quite clearly, and making sure that however land is acquired in the future, it is done in a way that honours current laws and honours our commitment to the treaty.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
In relation to a couple of comments made there, both really important points. Mr Rurewhai talks about the Deputy Speaker. That is a really important point in Part 3 of this bill. So the Parliamentary Service Act makes it clear that the 2000 Act, Parliamentary Service Act 2000, makes it clear that the Deputy Speaker can have the functions and powers of the Speaker, but it's unclear in the Clerk of the House of Representatives Act 1988. This goes back to the starting point, which was the Act was written in 1988 and needs updating, and so this makes it crystal clear that the Deputy Speaker can exercise the functions of the Speaker. In relation to Glenn Bennett's point around Section 52, or Clause 52, I should say, Madam Chair, this is a bit of a carryover provision, but it makes it clear that parliamentary precincts in Clause 53 are Parliament buildings, including the very important executive wing, of course, and the schedules, Part 1 and Schedule 2, and Part 2 of Schedule 2 have the indicative map of the land, and the key point is that there's flexibility for Parliament in the future if it chooses to grow and expand, and those are all, there's a process underway around that at the moment, but it just gives a bit of some flexibility so that by resolution the House can expand the grounds without having to go through a legislative change, because being on parliamentary grounds has particular meaning for Parliament, not the least of which is leave. And before any honourable member asks, yes, there would be the ability to extend that to places of ill repute near Parliament, but there is no current proposal on the table to do that, and I hasten to add, for everyone listening, the government is not intending to do that.
Ingrid Leary.
I don't know what to comment on what's just been said. ChatGPT has brought up a summary on, would be summary over what's been happening on there is the fact that the Parliament at this point is not suddenly planning to expand its precinct, like taking over backbenches. But yeah, I don't know what else we can sit there and review on that particular one there. So let's kick off with Part 4 of the bill, which kicks off with more from Ingrid Leary. Where is it? I think that might be where we are right now.
Right part now, Madam Chair. I just want to draw the Minister's attention to Section 55. It talks about the Speaker controlling and administering the parliamentary precincts, and it talks specifically about the powers that are vested in the Speaker, and then it kind of self-refers back in subsection 2 to subsection 1, but it's pretty unclear about what the precincts mean. So I'm thinking of a specific example here where, for example, is it the Minister's view that the Speaker has authority and powers under this legislation to direct and control members of various workforces, such as security guards, the parliamentary colleagues or staff working with MPs, and the press gallery? And I'm thinking about examples where there could be events happening on the forecourt and members of Parliament might want their EAs and others present. Can the Speaker, under the legislation as it's currently worded, make an order to remove the press gallery, for example, or to require staff to go back inside? The reason I raise this, Madam Chair, is that in some of those situations, members of Parliament could feel quite insecure, given the volatility at the moment around public protest and polarised views. And parliamentary members may not want to venture onto the forecourt if they don't feel they have adequate support from staff. Equally, there is a duty for the fourth estate, the media in this place, to make sure that everything here happens transparently, and it is a great public interest when there are large crowds on the forecourt. Now, it may well be, I'm not challenging anything that has happened over recent times. It may well be that that is the Minister's understanding, but I question whether the legislation as it's currently worded actually does make that explicit, and whether, if that is his view and if it was the will of the committee, it should be added. If it was not the will of the committee, or if there were not public submissions on these very important points, then my view would be that the legislation should be read at face value, and that the clarification should be made by an amendment, or we should have it on the record of what actually the committee came to conclude here. Madam Chair, these are not entirely hypothetical situations, which is why I'm raising them very respectfully, but I do think that the public interest, the media interest, and also the personal views of MPs when it comes to staff and resourcing and support need to be considered when we're looking at the boundaries that relate to Section 55, which really does confer an awful lot of power to the Speaker, or vested in the Speaker, as is right to have that power. But I think the boundaries need to be extremely clear so that in those situations everybody is comfortable and clear about what the rules are and when they could decline or not follow a direction, or when they're required to under this legislation.
Right Honourable Adrian Rurifei.
Hopefully I can be helpful on that particular question. It's actually a question I asked at Select Committee. What we need to remember is that under the new set of rules and under this new legislation, which we'll talk about in Part 7, there's a clear monitoring role and reporting role, and the direct reporting is with the CEO of Parliamentary Service. The Speaker of the House has overall authority, but doesn't actually carry it out himself or herself. And so, it's really important that we recognise that the parliamentary security will be operating in a very professional way under clear rules, and in fact, the regime for reporting such incidents and carrying that out is at arm's length from the Speaker of the House.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm grateful to my friend Mr Rurifei for outlining that. Of course, with his experience as a former Speaker, I think he would have been able to go through these issues at Select Committee, which I'm sure they did. The member does raise a good point. I mean, the Speaker has broad discretion in administration and control of the precincts. That's what Clause 55 means. The easiest way to think about it is the Speaker is essentially the Minister of Parliament. They're in charge of Parliament. They're like Parliament's Minister. It's not a perfect analogy, it's an inapt analogy, but it's close enough to the truth. But of course, there's a couple of checks on the Speaker just having unlimited power. One is that he's subject to the control of the House, and I've been around long enough to see no confidence motions, and sometimes they get moved and most times they don't, but they sit on the order paper, and members who've been around for a while remember some of the back and forwards about those. So ultimately the House is in control of who the Speaker is, so that is actually a really important check. And then the other thing I would say is that the Speaker has to act reasonably. And why do I say that? Well, there's quite a long line of case law around this, most notably the Beggs case, which is to do with protest and assembly on the forecourt. And of course the Speaker, as indeed the whole of Parliament is subject to the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990 by dint of Section 3. Is it Section 3? Yes, it is. My friend James Meagher's nodding at me. Section 3 of the Bill of Rights, which makes both the Parliament, well, all of the Parliament, the Executive, the Legislature, the Executive, and the judicial branches of government subject to the Bill of Rights, which means that powers in relation to Parliament have to be exercised in accordance with the Bill of Rights. And so that is an important check as well. So I understand where the member's coming from, but of course Clause 7 is the substantive change that we're making around the parliamentary security officers, which is why I think the rubber hits the road on this stuff.
Okay, so for those who are probably also wondering, a great way could be sit there and say, is the Speaker is the caretaker of Parliament in the aspect of they decide what, they basically are the guardian of doing it, and considering it's the only role that actually has a residence on site for where that accommodation on site is the Speaker's apartment. No other MP or Minister has sleeping facilities, officially speaking, in Parliament. Not sure about unofficially, though. I'm pretty sure quite a few have fallen asleep in their offices at some point, as does happen on there. Not much else can be clarified in that section there, so let's see what more comes off from Ingrid.
Mary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in view of the incredibly helpful comments from my colleague, the Right Honourable Adrian Rurifei, and also what the Minister has indicated, and I understand and appreciate the validity and importance of the Bill of Rights, what I heard from my colleague was something around due process and the line of communication and direction being really crystal clear and and not muddied. I appreciate these things happen very quickly when they do. I wonder if the Minister can indicate whether he is open-minded about looking at the devil in the detail about how that should happen, so that the reasonableness test, which we know is incredibly broad, is not the litmus test, but there is something a little bit more substantial, so that those delegations happen appropriately and everybody is clear about what the rules are and what they do and don't need to do.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
Well, I'm happy to have a look at it. The ship has sailed somewhat, to be honest, because the committee has reported the bill back unanimously, and as I understand it, there's no amendment paper from the member in relation to that. But I'm happy to look at it in the future. But until we've got evidence that there's actually a problem, having gone through quite a long process, the gestation of this bill has been many years. It actually spans back to the previous government. So happy to have a look at it in the future, but I'm not convinced at the moment that there's actually a problem with solving.
The question is that the Minister's amendment to Part 3 set out... excuse me. I'll get through this. The question is that the Minister's amendment to Part 3 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 3 is amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we come now to...
I don't think there's much else that we can sit there and say on there. Let's continue with the next part, which I think is Part 6 or Part 7? Part 7 is where things get a bit interesting.
Part 4. Part 4 is the debate on clauses 57 to 100. Salaries, allowances, expenses and services for members and others. And Schedule 3. The question is that Part 4 stand part. Ingrid Leary.
I'm just excited to get back to the point that I was asking about previously. It's not a major one. It is a really good change to the legislation where it shows some leadership from this place around adult dependency and a recognition that some members of Parliament have adult dependents and that there should be different provisions made that can ensure that families spend time together. And I think this is a good signal actually to the wider community about having some flexibility, because previously only the dependent children, I think 18 years or under, might even be under 18 years, I can't remember, could qualify for travel. And that is not to be a perk of the job. It's really about making sure that children and their parents that work in this place actually remember who each other is, given the long hours. But that did not apply and did not take into account any element of dependency. So we've got this new or changed provision, Section 61, and there is a test in it, and it talks about a disability that means they require ongoing daily care, and then there are a number of things that need to be fulfilled under subsection A, with the member presumably being the one who provides the care, and subsection B about financial dependence and the fact they're not living with another person in a de facto relationship. So that all seems really good. When I turn over to section 63 and I see the meaning of a dependent child, it's pretty similar, but we have in there in subsection C to whom A provides ongoing care, and then a number of the other similar tests. And I guess it could be argued, because we've got enrolled at a registered school within the meaning of section 10(1) of the Education and Training Act. Really it's about the meaning of ongoing care, because it could be that there are some people who are in that education who may be living with others but are still relying financially on a parent. They're not in a de facto relationship, they're pretty dependent, they can't get a job, a part-time job, but they may not necessarily be living in the same home, which is not in there. It's just got provisions about family, ongoing care and not being in a de facto relationship. So I looked in the earlier on, it doesn't really define what ongoing care is. It defines the meaning of a dependent child, but I wonder if the Minister could clarify for the record how he sees the boundaries of this, so that I don't think it's intended to capture people who are very dependent but not living in the same household as the MP. And I think it would be good to know that, because otherwise there could be, with some of the clever legal and other minds in this place, there could be some pushing up against the boundaries of the rules, and we would need to be really clear about who can qualify.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I appreciate the point the member's making. Ultimately, the judge of this is the Speaker. So, and I am not, I appreciate the member's invitation, but I am not going to seek to define that here, because I would get it wrong and I would not want to mislead people. There will be a range of factual circumstances around this. As I think every member knows, people's living circumstances can be complex. They can be simple. Sometimes they are complex. I'm not judging anyone. I would never seek to do that. The intent of this is, as the member rightly outlines, to be slightly more progressive around support that can be provided, and again just update and make sure that we're keeping pace with the variety of circumstances that some people find themselves in. So there is no test, and I suspect that's probably deliberate. Ultimately, the judge of this will be the Speaker, and there's a whole range of things in the Speaker's determinations and the rules around funding and allowances and things like that, where ultimately the Speaker is the final say, and that's, you know, the same checks apply, as I said, probably about 10 minutes or so ago in relation to judgments around that.
The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 4 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 4 is amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we come to Part.
Well, it's interesting talking about this. And Catherine, you have really sat down there and actually hit the nail on the head there about parents who having to sit there and deal with dependency of adult children. You have done that on there. Great comment on there. Oh well, shits and goggles in there. So that's definitely so there's some of our fun stuff that sits there and goes in there. Okay, I think was it part 5 and part 6? Let's sit there and see how Parliament brushes this all off.
Part 5, the debate on clauses 101 to 120, Clerk in Office of the Clerk, and Schedules 4 and 5. The question is that Part 5 stand part. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 5 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 5 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to Part 6. Part 6 is the debate on clauses 121 to 161, Parliamentary Service and other parliamentary bodies, and Schedule 6. The question is that Part 6 stand part. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 6 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 6 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we come now to Part 7. This is the debate on clauses 162 to 190B, Parliamentary Security. The question is that Part 7 stand part. Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and the Minister did allude to this a bit earlier, and we do, again, don't want to labour this, but want to spend a moment just reflecting. This is around parliamentary security, and again, I without sort of expecting the Minister to do everything I say, but to explain a little bit what this is about, because I think what we currently have and what this part will do is quite a major change in terms of parliamentary security. My first question, just to open up, is around subpart 1. Clause 162, 2, subpart 1, just around the actual definition of a security guard. And I just want to seek clarification around they are specifically employed by parliamentary services. Because I know in the past, for example, an eco office, an electorate office out in the provinces or out in around the country, and there have been moments when there has been red flag issues and security. Obviously, there's been security things put in place, but actually having a security guard, for example, armour guard or others, for a set amount of days or for a week because of something that's been heightened in that community. So my question to the Minister is just to clarify that when we're actually talking specifically, again, subpart 1 about the actual definition of a security officer, that they are specifically employed by parliamentary services, or does that go beyond it to contracted armour guard type of services?
Honourable Chris Bishop.
Madam Chair, I'm advised it does not include contractors. It applies to people employed by Parliament. The member makes a good point around that this is a change, and it is largely to clarify the law and make sure we have a modern approach to parliamentary security. It's modelled on the Court Securities Act. So the parliamentary security officers, who do a very good job, may I say, will be similar to those of court security officers who, if you think about the other branch of government, the judicial branch, they play a similar role in relation to that. So the bill gives parliamentary security officers statutory powers of consent search, denial of entry, temporary seizure of specified items and temporary detention. The powers apply in the parliamentary precinct to parliamentary meetings outside the precinct. So, for example, sometimes select committees travel and do submissions in hotels or community halls, and actually I think probably we should do a little bit more of that, to be honest. And electorate and community officers, and of course if MPs do travel for those, tends to be, by definition it's not Parliament, it's not the parliamentary precinct, and so because it's the sort of everyday run-of-the-mill place, make sure that if there is security applied there, then those powers apply. It also gives security officers immunity for the appropriate exercise of their functions and powers. It's quite interesting. Security officers here currently lack those statutory powers and immunities. They rely on the common law and the rights of an occupier under the Trespass Act 1980. So I think we would all agree that parliamentary security here does an excellent job, and it is really important that they have the appropriate powers in order to make sure that people who work in this building, it's not about MPs to be honest, far more people who are not MPs work here than actual MPs, so it's more about the staff. And we also need to make sure that Parliament is accessible as possible. You know, I for one think it is a fantastic thing that it is so easy to visit our Parliament, and it's free, and you should never be charged to come to Parliament, and you can walk in, and as long as you're, not carrying things that you shouldn't be carrying, you can walk in, sit up and watch Question Time, or you can watch the debates. And you can wander around and you can visit your MP. That ability, I've been lucky enough to travel to other parliaments around the world. Sometimes even when I've been a tourist in my own time, I've travelled to other parliaments. It's a slightly sad thing to admit. Other parliaments are not like that. They're not. The House of Commons in the UK, it's like getting into Fort Knox, which is sad, but it's the reality. And there are other legislatures and congresses and houses of representative, which is all but impossible to visit as a tourist or even probably an everyday citizen, and that is a sad reality, and I hope we never get to that point in New Zealand. But part of making sure we never get to that point is making sure there's appropriate security, so that's what this section is about.
Well, that's interesting and brings the part about security, and it will be interesting as, will the jurisdiction be the electorate office? Makes sense of having a select committee and where's a good place that you can run a select committee meeting? The Auckland Town Hall, the Carterton RSA, it would make sense for those sorts of things to be in place. I mean, it's definitely in there. It's quite interesting where lines are being drawn for different things to MPs. Let's continue over with more questions to the Bish.
Dr. Lawrence Yunnan.
I just have another question for the Minister regarding this section, and I'm looking at basically in the ballpark of clause 172A and to about 175. And I think that's to do with the definition of a detected item. Correct me if I'm wrong, and it could be something that I've missed here. Would the Minister be able to just clarify what a detected item is, or is a dependent item based on the four possible processes and how the detected item needs to be surrendered very much on the item itself? And that's kind of the first, clarification. And the second clarification around detected item is, does a detected item, in order for it to be handed over to the officer on reasonable, if the officer on reasonable grounds means that the item itself, for example, may need to be about to commit or have committed or has the potential to commit or is considered of an offense or is considered dangerous. So just there isn't a specific definition I can see on what a detected item is and the different range it could be treated.
Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Look, I'm going to ask another. Oh goodness me. I'd like to ask a question in relation to security again in part 7 of this bill, and my question is really thinking about the amazing job that our parliamentary security officers do. They have a tough job in what is a really changed environment, particularly in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, in terms of some of the risks that are presenting, not just to MPs but to other people in the general public who want to come into Parliament. They have an amazing ability to detect and act when and we know that the existing provisions under common law potentially compromise their ability to deal with serious incidents, risks that would disrupt Parliament, disrupt running of government. And though parliamentary agencies and members continue to advocate for Parliament's accessibility, and there's clear feedback we know from public engagement that should continue, we know that physical accessibility needs to be balanced with security and safety concerns. We know, as the Minister has pointed out, that the New Zealand Parliament provides more physical access to the public than many overseas parliaments, and we do not want to lose that. But its security arrangements are really way out of step with our international counterparts. So we know from the review of parliamentary security that staff regularly have to manage irate, threatening and problematic individuals or even groups, and they currently lack the legislative power to respond effectively, safely and efficiently, and largely depend upon the police to be able to be here, and we see that police do come in here at those times. The review recommended that our parliamentary security officers are provided with legislative powers of detention as soon as practicable. So my question really is to the Minister is in relation to what training and support will be provided to our parliamentary security officers. If we are providing these additional powers, which I understand the ability to detain people, they would have the ability to lay their hands on someone, to handcuff them and to hold them until police arrived. That puts a number of health and safety risks upon the parliamentary security officer. We know from police experience that just simply the act of arresting somebody can result in physical injuries from both the arresting officer and the person being arrested. Those things are never straightforward, as you might think they are. There are a number of injuries, whether it be a dislocated shoulder, an injured finger, other scratching. There's a number of things that could go on if we are expecting our parliamentary security officers to step in and physically put their hands on someone. I think that New Zealanders would like to know that if we are providing this additional power, which we're not arguing with, we think that there needs to be an increase of security here. We want to know that those frontline workers who are putting themselves on the line, what training will they be provided to deal with situations that could be volatile and dangerous? And secondly, what support additional to that training will be provided, because we know if someone's been assaulted or abused, that weighs upon a worker in the days and weeks after the incident has occurred. We know very well most of our parliamentary security staff here, and we as our colleagues and friends, we would like to be reassured that there is a plan in place to make sure that they're safe at work and that there is sufficient consideration gone into how this will play out for their work safety on a day-to-day basis. I'll be interested to know the Minister's response to those questions.
And just something to point out there, Casey Costello used to be a security guard at Parliament.
Honourable Chris Bishop.
I need to clarify my answer from a few minutes ago in relation to the contractor point. The answer is clause 136(1)(b) makes it clear that there can be contractors appointed if the Chief Executive considers it necessary and desirable, but they have to be qualified and trained to the equivalent standards. So sorry about that. Members raised a couple of other really good points. Thank them for that. In relation to Mr Hunan's point around detected items, any item found by a parliamentary security officer during a search, the security officer can ask to examine it and determine such matters, such as whether it may have been used for an offence, for example, or is dangerous. So it's slightly convoluted to get there, but in a way that he's become known for, he's managed to find a tricky section of the tricky clause. And the members' references, the references for the members' notification are 172A2, 172B1 and B, and 173(1) and C. So that I think deals with that. Ms Anderson makes, I think, a really good point around, quite broad powers given to security officers. That the section is modelled on the Court Security Act, and so broadly, with some modifications for the parliamentary environment, the powers of security officers will be the same as those of court security officers. And I can't exactly remember when the Court Securities Act was passed, but no doubt the courts went through a similar exercise to what Parliament's gone through, which is realising that there needed to be a bit more statutory tramlines and rules around security at courts, and so this brings Parliament into line with that, which I think is wholly appropriate. I'm advised that there is already training and there will continue to be training for security officers who are here at Parliament, who, as the member says, do a great job. And I would also draw, just more broadly, while we're talking about this part, to some of the quite careful drafting that's been gone through in relation to these powers. So it's power to use reasonable force, but then there are a variety of checks and balances in the section as well, which, so for example, 190B, the Chief Executive must report annually on the exercise of specified powers. Parliamentary security officers must report the exercise of certain powers. Powers are not generally applicable if the police is involved. So yes, there are powers around detention and reasonable searches and things like that. They're all there for good reasons, but there are also checks and balances in place as well. I think that's wholly appropriate.
Ingrid Leary.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, that's actually interesting, the part that at least is clarifying a lot of things that are going in there. For what Kiwi Scouts are asking, I'm playing my goblins. It's in a 10-day, this one's a 10-day game marathon. So it's definitely interesting to show the fact that the parliamentary security guard is based on the same powers that a security officer has at a courthouse, which is useful to put into context. just so that we can actually have that at least a modelling on an existing act that we currently use that has not really caused any problems. Okay, back to the bush. Well, actually, no, Ingrid.
Yeah, this question is really for listeners at home who might be wondering how this new legislation is going to impact their ability to protest and what the lines are there. And I refer to the Minister's previous comments about the adjacent the areas adjacent to the Parliament. In fact, he mentioned a couple of watering holes. And I'm wondering what is a test for adjacency? That is going to have practical implications when it comes to electorate offices. There are some things around pavements and footpaths and so on, but is it feasible that if there was a protest or something where the centre of action that contained threat was at the Parliament and it spilled over and went to some of those watering holes, would a parliamentary security officer potentially be have on reasonable grounds the ability to intervene if it was the same kaupapa, if you like? The other one is the question about reasonable grounds, which is a well recognised legal test. But I would ask the Minister to consider how that interplays with the powers that are invested in the Speaker that we discussed previously, because I had asked if there could be some kind of clarification around process, and I think the Minister thought I meant through the legislative drafting, but actually it was more a procedural thing. So my question is, without a clear process of the Speaker using his or her powers through the Chief Executive or others, the decisions that a security guard believes that they are making on reasonable grounds, which has a legal objectivity element to it, what is the interplay if the Speaker has given a direction that has not gone through a process that involves the Chief Executive, or if there isn't kind of a clear process? I'm thinking here about both the members of the public's ability to protest in a strong way, but also security officers having clarity about what is reasonable grounds, because the Minister's mentioned the safeguards in a retrospective element, which is, annual reporting and so on. These are decisions that have to be made in very quick time, split seconds, by individuals weighing all these things up. And again, they're not conceptual or imaginary, because the very vexed questions that led to this legislation, in my view, were probably what we saw on the steps of Parliament and the lines that were crossed. There isn't a single view in Aotearoa New Zealand about how those lines were crossed. Many people have many different views about what was and wasn't appropriate. I think most people would agree that burning down the children's playground was not appropriate. But it is so important to have clarity, and I'd just like to get an understanding from the Minister about that reasonableness test. Should it be considered alone, or how does it interplay with the Speaker's powers? And would, for example, a security officer be able to rely on action taken by the Speaker? Presumably, if it was pursuant to a recognised process, that would be fine. But where the Speaker has just said something and then that influences a security guard who may or may not have reasonable grounds, will that Speaker's direction form part of the reasonableness objective test legally? It is quite a technical question, but it has real life implications for when people protest and for the very difficult job that our security officers have to have in making judgments in the moment.
The member makes good points, but if I could summarise, it is what is reasonable, and the answer is it depends. That's the beauty of the word reasonable, and it's why it appears multiple times in the statute books and throughout the common law, because what is reasonable in the circumstances is fact specific, and it's impossible by definition almost to give a definition. If that makes, I think that works. So, historically the common law has talked about the man on the Clapham omnibus. It's probably inapplicable to New Zealand, the Karori trolley bus or electric bus these days. What that person thinks is reasonable, that's the test, and it depends. The short answer is it depends. So it's impossible to judge in advance, and yes, it is true that people have to make decisions, and that's the whole, that's life. And then what's important is that there are guardrails and tramlines in place to guide that decision-making process, and then also there are checks and balances afterwards. So parliamentary service officers can exercise powers in relation to the other point the member makes, only in the parliamentary precinct, a place where select committees are meeting, electorate officers if the CE, Chief Executive, has authorised it. Beyond that place, police have jurisdiction and the necessary power. So to put this into real terms, when you walk into the gates down the bottom and you walk into Parliament, you're subject to Parliament's jurisdiction. When you walk outside and go down Lambton Quay, that's a public footpath or public road, and the ordinary laws of the land apply, and they apply here as well. But you're not part of the parliamentary precinct at that point.
Well, that's actually a very good clarification from the Bush, and very good questions there from Ingrid, mentioning the fact about the parliamentary protest and what happens on there. Because yes, many people have different opinions on that protest of what is and isn't in there. I can certainly tell you as a Wellingtonian looking for flats at the time, it was frustrating being asked every single flat viewing you went to, have you been to the parliamentary protest and are you vaccinated for COVID-19? So that is something I definitely can say from my experience, flat hunting in the middle of the parliamentary protest. Okay, let's hear more from Parliament.
Oh, I was just wondering if the Right Honourable Adrian Rurifei, you were both standing. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add on this section that the committee considered a number of things. There was, as it was originally drafted, a procedure in there that required that when an object was removed from someone, they had to be detained. The committee decided that we wanted to give the security officers as many options as possible. For example, if that object was brought to Parliament unknowingly and not without intention of using it as a weapon, for example, the danger was then considered to be over, and that detaining the person wasn't necessary, particularly if they decided they were leaving. And so rather than bring police into it, the committee felt that that could be the end of that situation. And it's relevant to the question that my colleague Lawrence Zunan asked as well. We considered a lot of things and decided that under the common law that the security officers currently operate under just wasn't enough for 2025, and that it was important that we had a set of processes, that we had a set of rules that they could follow, and as the Minister pointed out, in a reasonable way, whatever that looks like. I think it's important that this House recognise the gravity of some of the situations that our security people become involved with. And I think we owe it to the safe operation of our security and of this Parliament that we give them all the tools that they actually need.
David McLeod.
This question now closed.
The question is that debate on this question now closed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
Action New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The question is agreed. The question is that the Minister's amendments to Part 7 set out on AP number 362 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Part 7 as amended stand part. All those in favour say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, the time has come for me to report progress.
Just to give you a bit of a hint here, things were not done in the normal standard procedure. Normally another speaker comes in to do this, but all the other ones as part of the deputy speaker team were unavailable. So buckle up tight to see what happens.
Just for the House's record, I'm going to do something a little unusual here. I'm going to ask one of the members to report back his progress to me because the other speakers...
Simon, go ahead, well, here we go. This will be good.
Well, our other speaker's still in his select committee. So, the House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the Parliament bill and reports that it has made progress on the bill. The committee also considered the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill and reports it has made progress.
No, I think that was to say no. No progress.
Has made no progress on the bill.
I move. What's the last bit at the bottom?
I was going to say that it has made progress, Madam Speaker. Like all of this progress we've just
No,
witnessed.
we made progress on the Parliament bill. We haven't made progress on the transport bill.
Madam Speaker, on that basis, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Parliament bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day. And the Land Transport Management Time of Use Charging Amendment Bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day. So members, as per the agreements of...
So as you can see there, Simon Court really doesn't know how to read information off a sheet. Not sure whether he was actually taking progress on there, because he wanted to try and report progress on a bill that was not covered. What do the chats in the comments got to say about that when we get there? I just do know there's a little bit of a delay in comments getting across from when I say it to when you guys actually start responding. It takes takes about 30 seconds. So yeah. Yeah. Yep. I don't think Simon Court would make a very good assistant speaker. Well, he's never technically done that role before, but he did have the paperwork in front of him on exactly what to say, and still somehow managed to balls it up. You are so right there, Catherine. Yep, you are so right. Okay, well, that's our fun bit for what's been happening in Parliament for this week. So let's get off to the bills that what you can put in submissions that are coming up over the next week. There's the inquiry into the performance of reporting and public accountability, where you can put in, submission closes Wednesday the 29th of October. The Local Government Auckland Council Transport Governance Amendment Bill, which will be where the dissolution of Auckland Transport and bringing it under the separating the functions of Auckland Transport. Also, another one that's out there, Redress Systems for Abuse in Care Bill. And it closes on Wednesday, 26th of November. So, you'll have to ask Stacey that Kiwi Skip. Just remember, it is a long weekend. Definitely right. I wonder if he could find his correct paperwork at Chemist Warehouse. Considering he seems to have a bit of a obsession with feminine hygiene products available at Chemist Warehouse. And yeah, it's a decent lag tonight for me. Been like this since Thursday. Yep. So true. Now, anyone who wants to sit down there and continue with that, we do still have our poll on the page if you want to get your votes in doing it. Some clarification: should all coalition MPs be thrown into the Wellington Harbour tomorrow as celebrations to Labour Day? That is to throw them into the water for making people work more than 40 hours a week. It is not for them to be injured or hurt. It is just basically to symbolise the fact that when you push people to work more than 40 hours a week in 8-hour days, that is an unacceptable condition, and you should be thrown into Wellington Harbour for insisting on such a low bar to be done. That's from Samuel Parnell, who was the one who pushed for the 40-hour working week. And we do have 60% of people who sits there and wants the MPs to be thrown into the Wellington Harbour, with 40% who don't. So, as you can sit there and see there, we'll have popped in the chat. The only MP who would not actually have to go outside his electorate to sit there and be thrown into the Wellington Harbour is the Bish. You've got a choice of two wharves, Petone Wharf or Days Bay. And Nicola, you've got Queen's Wharf. I know you don't have an electorate. I know you stood in Aharu. I know your electorate office in Aharu, but you live closer to the Queen's Wharf when you live in Wellington Central. So, you've got Queen's Wharf. You can always jump off off the tower by Te Papa. I'm not or off there, that might be a good place to sit there and do it. There is the overseas terminal building. You could always do it as well. Or if you really, the ferry, no, I wouldn't do it near the ferry terminal. No, ignore that one. No, don't do it near the ferry terminal. It can be a bit rocky near kai whara. Okay, for those who are watching us, thank you for sitting there. Join us. We'll be back next Sunday at 8 p.m. for another edition of the Order Paper Podcast. Hopefully back with Laura by then, or hopefully I'll have a nice, lovely co-host to be there with me. Have a good evening.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper Podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at 8 p.m. New Zealand Standard Time every Sunday.
Flying solo tonight. No producer, no guest host, no editor, and nobody audience watching me. Who will help me when it all goes wrong? If it goes wrong. If it goes wrong, if it goes wrong, or will it be IMP soon? Flying solo at 8 p.m. tonight on the Order Paper Podcast.